Over decades, Ridgefield's development has been carefully guided thanks in large part to the untold hours of volunteer work by commissioners like you. Ridgefield and the Planning and Zoning Commission have earned their reputations by confronting issues, creating and enforcing regulations, and scrutinizing every application fairly and thoroughly. This includes the Commission's decision in 2015 to ban both medical and recreational marijuana businesses in Ridgefield. You are the beneficiaries and now the stewards of that reputation to burnish it or to tarnish it. As perfect as Ridgefield is, like all towns, it cannot simply stay the same. It will constantly evolve or devolve, for better or for worse. Its future is in your hands, in the hands of Ridgefield public officials, Ridgefield's duly elected Planning and Zoning Commission. Hartford doesn't make that job any easier. Examples include 830G passed in 1989 and legalizing medical marijuana in 2012. Then Governor Malloy said we don't want Connecticut to follow in the path pursued by other states, which essentially legalizes marijuana to anyone able to find a doctor who will give a prescription counter to federal laws. At that time, Ridgefield's Planning and Zoning Commission passed and then extended a moratorium on medical marijuana, and after working sessions with the first selectman, police chief, director of social services, members of the Coalition Against Substance Abuse, and Ridgefield state representative, passed zoning regulations banning both medical and recreational marijuana in Ridgefield. Ultimately, the regulation they passed, which remains in Ridgefield zoning regulations today, prohibited businesses in Ridgefield that grow and dispense medical and recreational marijuana. With so many states relaxing cannabis regulations and generating taxes from it, Connecticut moved rapidly from decriminalization in 2011 to medical marijuana in 2013 to commercialization and taxation of adult recreational marijuana in 2021. Hartford signed into law an act regulating the so-called responsible and equitable use of cannabis, but giving its 169 towns the authority to regulate or to outright ban the 14 cannabis businesses the law defined without infringing on the rights of adults to buy, possess, and use legal marijuana. On September 14th, 2021, before 4 of you were on the Commission approved a 1-year moratorium expiring on September 24 of this year. Here is a sample of their discussion. Why?
That the zoning commission decides whether or not it's going to have a moratorium. We decide we're going to have a moratorium. That gives the town, i.e. the selectmen, time to kick around the idea of yes or no to some kind of a regulatory prohibition on this on the substance within the town borders.
Right.
If the Board of Selectmen, through its machination, if it wanted to hold a referendum, it could, but it would want to get some feedback from the community as to how the community at large feels. If the vote is finally that there is not going to be an allowance for cannabis in the borders of the town of Ridgefield, that takes care of that. And then the zoning commission would write an ordinance, would write regulation that prohibited that use.
Right.
No, I totally agree with John. I think he's really summarized it really well. But for the record, I heard all of our conversation last meeting about a referendum, but my understanding, at least in my own brain, was that the Board of Selectmen was talking about, I actually attended one of the selectmen meetings, and they were talking about potentially initiating a ordinance. And what, at least in my view, what I really want to do is allow the Board of Selectmen to run through that process, which I presume would include public input for a proposed ordinance, and allow the Board of Selectmen to do that, which they seemed inclined to do, before we got in the mix, trying to get into the detail of the how, what, where, when regulation. Allow them to run through that, and the moratorium just allows everyone a moment for the Board of Selectmen to chase the idea of an ordinance, which I thought they were headed down anyway.
After not one, not two, but 3 public information hearings where the Board of Selectmen exhausted public interest in and input on the topic of permitting local cannabis businesses, both medical and recreational, here's what they decided and why.
I've heard very and amazingly strong opinions, on sort of both sides, and I was just able to come to one session that we had here on a Saturday morning, which was clearly the larger one, and it was somewhat balanced. I think towards the end there was clearly more of a feeling towards no, but again there were plenty. I think I had 8 people or so who very passionately talked about the need to have it.
When we first started our Community Coalition Against Alcohol and Substance Abuse, it was after a young man, 21 years old, died of an overdose on Main Street, heroin overdose. And it was a shock. Main Street, Ridgefield, kind of brought a sense of reality to it. We're looking at taking money from something that we've worked so hard to try and keep our kids, especially with alcohol. I mean, the years, and it's still #1 in the schools. Vaping is running a very close second, and we all know that the oils that are out there, the THC content could be crazy. I mean, it's almost an hallucinogenic drug, and you don't want your kids getting behind the wheel with that kind of stuff on the street. And I do think that a store in our community, a dispensary, would certainly allow for a greater presence of it in our town, because what we have found that many of the kids who are at that younger age are getting it from an older sibling. I see that same type of behavior opening up in the community, and I think if we have an opportunity to help stop that we should make every effort to do so. So that's where I'm coming from. Barbara, do you want to say something?
But in terms of going into the business of it, and having it as a presence on our main street when the kids are coming out of school on a Friday afternoon and coming down Main Street, Rudy, you're right. It's everything we fought against.
Why don't we just have the motion be that the Ridgefield Board of Selectmen hereby establishes a policy not to allow any form of cannabis to be legally
Any form of cannabis business, is what you're saying.
business to be established in the town of Ridgefield.
That's what they were trying to get to.
How about that?
That's exactly right, business.
So we have a motion, Barbara, seconded by Maureen. If there's no further comment, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Barbara?
Aye.
Nays? 1 nay. Motion carries.
On April 25th, First Selectman Marconi sent the Planning and Zoning Commission a letter conveying the Board of Selectmen's policy decision and reasoning. The following evening, on April 26th, he punctuated that decision with a personal appeal to the Commission, reminding you that you asked for guidance from the Board of Selectmen and briefed the Commission on that guidance in person.
The Planning and Zoning Commission suggested that this is a policy decision that should be debated by the Board of Selectmen and decided there. If we were to say, yes, we want to move forward, we would send it back to P&Z to establish the regulation, location, and all the other variables that would go into that decision. If we said no on the policy, that would establish that decision. It turned out to be pretty interesting. We did hold 3 public hearings. First one, we had 4 people, the second 8, and the third about 22. It was interesting. The majority of people were against. There were some that felt it should go to a referendum. I consulted with counsel on that. And basically, it came down to 3 basic decisions we had to make. And I think Rob sent out the letter I sent that explained that we are not allowed to call a referendum on an opinion question. It would be 14 different areas. We had our discussion. The opinion of the Board of Selectmen was to vote to establish a policy. They would rather not even bother going to a referendum. that we establish a policy at that meeting, last meeting, which we voted. The motion was approved 4-1, 4 in favor of a no use policy. One person voted against the motion, which was the reason for it. He felt it should have gone to a referendum. And that's what is basically said in this letter here, explaining those 3 different alternatives that we had. And that's where we're at. And the Board of Selectmen voted not establish a regulation for marijuana in any of the uses. So it's a quick overview, but I'm not going to go on and be repetitious relative to a policy, which is what the P&Z Commission
In
is.
your opinion, does that obviate the need for any kind of action on the part of the planning and zoning?
Well, I would say that's a discussion on the Planning and Zoning Commission. However, I would respectfully ask that you take the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen.
To the surprise and consternation of the Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning tabled a motion by Mr. Serena and Ms. Constantino.
P&Z referred it back to us for policy. We set the policy. It's not been adhered to. There was a motion put and a second, and they decided to table it. It hasn't come back, and that concerns me. It concerns a majority of the people in this town.
The Commission's failure to act concerned us so much that on June 9th, 6 days prior to the Board of Selectmen's advancing the cannabis ordinance, John Noonan, John Tartaglia, and yours truly, Kirk Carr, decided the time had come to put our money where our mouths are. Our only interest in this regulation is civic, not financial, and this application, as submitted, merely updates an existing, already approved zoning regulation passed by the Commission in 2015 to bring it into compliance with Connecticut's cannabis regulations and with a town policy adopted by the Board of Selectmen and a Ridgefield moratorium that expires on September 24th. Thank you for accepting our application and for belatedly opening this public hearing. When this commission passed zoning regulations prohibiting businesses that traffic in medical and recreational marijuana, it listed 6 reasons that are as valid in 2022 as they were in 2015. To eliminate any chance that an application would be submitted under some other permitted use, because federal government considers cannabis a Schedule I controlled substance, the state intends to limit licenses to serve regional populations. A licensed facility will be conveniently located within 20 minutes of Ridgefield. The pros and cons are inconclusive, and the experience of other states are contradictory. But in 2021, the state added one cynical new wrinkle to weigh. The state, in a bid to profit handsomely from taxing legal marijuana, has offered crumbs to Connecticut towns in the form of a 3% sales tax. You will soon see that this is chump change that is little more than an embarrassingly contemptuous and insulting bribe. There are basically 3 groups who think the Commission should welcome cannabis to Ridgefield. Those libertarians who believe that the government governs best that governs least and should butt out of adults making such decisions for themselves, no matter the impact on children or the social and economic costs. Those who are enamored with cannabis, either for personal pleasure or commercial profit. And finally, those who see dollar signs as a windfall in taxes and development for Ridgefield. If you are in the first 2 groups, this presentation is unlikely to change your mind. But if you're in the 3rd group, this presentation is intended to break the spell of the chump change bribe that is being dangled by the state. The commercial opportunity of cannabis can be blinding. The jobs it promises, the storefront it could occupy, the tourism it could attract, the taxes it could generate. But all that glitters is not gold, and all that promise can quickly evaporate into a distant mirage. The Cannabis Industry Association explains why in this excerpted video about an arcane section of the federal tax code, Section 280E, and its dire consequences in their own words.
You've probably heard about the green rush sweeping the nation. Although the cannabis plant is still federally illegal, in the 29 states plus DC where it is legal for adults or medical use, businesses are now legitimately growing it, selling it, and everything in between. You may think these businesses are swimming in profits, but what you may not know is that they're being taxed at an insanely high rate thanks to a little thing called Section 280E of the IRS tax code, making tax season for a cannabis business owner a real bummer. Imagine paying an effective tax rate 3.5 times higher than the business next door to you because you were forbidden from taking normal business deductions, such as payroll, rent, and other common costs of doing business. Cannabis dispensaries and cultivators are paying an effective tax rate of 70% or higher. By comparison, the corporate tax rate established by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 is 21%. The effect of this is that licensed cannabis businesses cannot invest as much in capital improvements or things like employee raises and benefits, hiring more employees, expanding operations, or giving back to the community. The disadvantages are numerous, from high turnover to higher prices, which drives customers back into the criminal market, and criminals don't file tax returns. Cannabis remains a Schedule I controlled substance according to the federal government, so this penalty applies to licensed cannabis businesses that operate in compliance with state laws and regulations. This means real problems for state legal cannabis businesses who are staying compliant while attempting to grow. Meanwhile, it has no effect on illegal operations that don't file tax returns. Well, cannabis businesses can't even deduct many of the costs incurred in staying compliant.
2 points merit emphasis. Confiscatory taxes impair cannabis businesses from doing many good things, including giving back to the community. Lawmakers were naive if they thought legalizing cannabis would end the illegal marijuana trade, including the scourge of fentanyl. This is no exaggeration. How bad is it? Well, it's so bad that California appropriated $100 million to bail out its legal pot business as it struggles to compete with the thriving illegal market. This is how Jared Kylo, proprietor of Higher Path, explains the very challenging economics of the legal cannabis business to NBC.
How much is a pound of marijuana taxed from the grow all the way to your store?
Right now, 50% of the price you see on our shelf is taxes.
Where there is a cheaper substitute, customers will gravitate to the cheaper illegal market.
The customer's saying, what is really my risk in going out to the illicit industry? What is my risk? Because right now, really what you're paying for in the legal industry is testing and taxes. And if testing isn't saving my life, why am I paying taxes?
Now to that mix, add the confiscatory federal tax code of Section 280E.
In 2020, we did $11.4 million in retail sales. Before federal taxes, I made $136,000 in profit. After federal taxes, I lost $80,000 as a business.
One doesn't need a degree from Wharton to know this business model is not sustainable. Sooner or later, the legal cannabis business proprietor has to face a stark choice. One road leads to almost certain financial destruction, and the other to survival and maybe to even fortune. Tiffany Devitt, Vice President of the California Cannabis Industry Association, explains how legal cannabis businesses can break bad.
There are companies that are basically playing both sides of the coin and are operating in the regulated market, but then also diverting some of their materials to the illicit market in order to fund their regulated operations.
They are finding it real easy that the only way that they can find profitability and keep their businesses open is by jumping back into having 1 foot in the illegal industry and 1 foot in the legal one, because it's the only place they can kind of fund their own business.
It was naive to think that legalization and confiscatory taxation would eradicate the illicit marijuana business.
Now that there's no barriers to entry and that there's no deterrence when it comes to crime, the cartels are back. And they're back because they know how to operate in this illicit industry. And so they've not only come back to like where they were pre-2018, they've come back stronger because they're growing more here. They're robbing stores and reselling the product back into the illicit market.
Whether legal marijuana businesses gone rogue or drug cartels on steroids, one thing they both have in common. They are much less squeamish about selling to underage customers. The so-called adult recreational cannabis business has zero probability of catering exclusively to people 21 years and older. That illegal market won't vanish because of legal commercialization and is already in Ridgefield's backyard. On June 23rd, News Times reported 3 Danbury smoke shops were busted for illegal marijuana sales. Even so, those local taxes are very tempting. But those crumbs are chump change as they represent 11 cents on the dollar of state and local taxes. 89 cents go to Hartford, 66 cents of which are in highly regressive excise taxes and 23% in the state sales tax. But that is just the income side of the equation. The Centennial Institute of Colorado Christian University has documented that the economic and social costs dwarf tax revenues by a factor of 4.5. 89 cents of that dollar goes to Hartford. Only 11 cents remains local, while most of the economic and social costs are borne almost entirely by the community. This may be a net positive for the state, but a major shortchange for the town. And every day we learn of the increasing social cost of youthful access to products with THC levels that are 200% higher than seen just a few decades ago. And the social and economic costs can be high and highly personal. Commissioner Nenji's lived experience can't be ignored.
For me, this is on a personal level, this is a very difficult discussion. Because some of what Rudy shared earlier about research and the effect is something that I experienced personally. A younger brother of mine who used marijuana or cannabis essentially got some brain damage. And for years, he hasn't been the same person. And the family essentially had to take care of it. Personally, for me, I would probably say, don't do it. Don't allow it in town.
Guns, which have been widely owned since well before the Bill of Rights was passed in 1791, alone can't explain the surge in mass shootings. Another common denominator that is emerging is the psychotic effects of high-potency cannabis on young males. This June 1st story from the Wall Street Journal connects the dots. Copies are available online. As is the New York Times report from June 23rd about the high-potency product's psychotic and addictive effects. In spite of these dangers, potency is largely unregulated. But even where it is, as in Connecticut, there is no known safe limit. And we don't have the luxury of time to educate parents and kids. John Katz weighs the consequences of high-potency cannabis against the paltry taxes that it might raise.
Marijuana is not the benign, recreational drug that it used to be. And I was somebody who would have used it if I could have, but I didn't. It's a very different drug today, and I think we all ought to familiarize ourselves with just how potent it is, how dangerous it can be, and weigh that against the possible increase in taxes that we might enjoy.
Okay, if taxes don't offset the social and economic costs, what are some of the non-tax benefits? Meg Sanders of Cana Provisions of Massachusetts told the ECDC at their public hearing in August of 2021, don't do it for the taxes, do it for the development opportunities.
Understanding of this isn't just about taxes, this is about jobs. This is about benefiting your town in a lot of ways. I have 112 employees at my Lee dispensary. 112 in a town of 2,500 people. I'm a significant employer, and that has made a big impact in a town that doesn't have a lot of industry.
That impressed Mitch Ancona of Ancona Wines and Liquors, who shared this reaction with the ECDC at their meeting on September 13th.
And I was also amazed on the young lady that spoke about her dispensary in Lee, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
She's got a freaking 100 and some odd people working for her.
Yeah.
Dude, I can't get 14 people to work for me. Like, how do you do that? That's crazy.
By the end of the meeting, ECDC Commissioner Sean Dowd raised the issue of the tight labor market's impact on restaurants and the need to import labor from neighboring towns.
There was a restaurant topic. Talking to a couple of different restaurateurs, everybody's struggling with staff, right? So it's not a common thing. One of them asked if there was a way to, to transport, right? So like if there was if there was a way to make it more economically feasible to bring in kind of like bus and wait staff from, if they were coming from Norwalk or, Danbury or something, like where the town would kind of promote some type of commute or kind of bus or transportation or something like that to try to kind of bring staff in like on a daily basis. Has that ever been discussed? Or
the post-pandemic shortage of labor is part of a longer-term trend, compounded by inflation and the surging cost of gas. Between 2005 and 2019, the number of Ridgefield employers increased almost 18%. While jobs increased 3.9%, the labor force lagged just 3.7%. Looking at greater Ridgefield, including Danbury, Reading, and Wilton, the employer numbers increased 15%, while the jobs increased 8%, the labor force lagged, increasing just 7.5%. The demand for labor has outpaced the supply of employees. According to the U.S. Census in 2019, Ridgefield imported 82% of its local labor force from neighboring towns. Fast forward to 2022, and the soaring gas prices and pain at the pump is making commutation prohibitive for all workers, especially minimum and low-wage workers. So recruiting workers is a full-time, never-ending job for Ridgefield businesses. Ridgefield doesn't need more jobs. Right now, it needs more employees. The practical equivalency to Boo's argument is a specious and dangerous distraction, as Elizabeth DeSalvo explains.
Hi, Elizabeth DeSalvo, 57 Whitebirch Road. I don't think we should casually overlook the young people in our life, because I grew up in the 70s. Many of my friends smoked pot at school all day long, and that's the difference between alcohol and marijuana. Young people, I know them still, they will, it's invisible, it's more invisible. Young folk don't go to high school and drink at 9 o'clock in the morning and spend their whole day drinking at school. That doesn't happen. But plenty of young people go to school and smoke marijuana all day. And it does have a huge effect on their brains, I believe that strongly. And so it's about the young folk and what it does to their lives. And I don't think that should be lightly, just tossed aside. Because, they might not be dying, but there might be many more of them who are sort of wrecking their lives in another way. And so I don't think that should be taken lightly at all. I just think it should be noted that, it might become so normal in our world if there's a place to buy it right down the road, that kids start to think, oh, it's totally cool to smoke pot, it's no big deal.
Don't think a cannabis business would be accretive, as existing traditional good businesses will predictably flee from neighboring businesses that are incompatible with their brand. Those empty storefronts will create a vacuum that will be filled by less attractive kinds of businesses. And just because a business is legal doesn't mean that every Skid Row business is appropriate for every town, particularly for a town such as Ridgefield, that is family-oriented, academically rigorous in its schools, that is spiritually robust, intellectually curious, culturally dynamic, and where the development and conservation and preservation thrive in harmony. What towns are more suited for the cannabis business? This is another kind of map showing the relative socioeconomic relationship of the 46 towns in Connecticut with a qualifying population of 25,000 or more. Median household incomes range from $36,000 to $206,000 from left to right on the horizontal axis, and the percent of adults with a bachelor's degree or higher range from 16% to 78% from the bottom to the top of the vertical axis. These two metrics are highly correlated with a coefficient of 0.87. 12 of the 13 towns that have approved cannabis zoning cluster in the lower left, or less affluent and less educated towns. West Hartford is the lone outlier. 9 of these qualifying towns, including Ridgefield, have approved moratoriums spanning the socioeconomic range of towns. The 5 qualifying towns that have chosen to prohibit cannabis are generally more affluent and well-educated. Ridgefield's closest peers, Westport and Greenwich, have said no to recreational adult cannabis. There are 12 other towns with populations less than 25,000 that have prohibited cannabis, including New Canaan and Weston, and Wilton remains under a moratorium. Fortunately, this legislation gives Ridgefield an escape hatch by empowering local elected officials, either by means of zoning regulations or an ordinance, or both, to opt out of this, which began the process that has culminated in a parallel path of both a revised zoning regulation submitted on June 9th and a town ordinance proposed by the Board of Selectmen on June the 15th.
And the next 4B has to do with the cannabis ordinance. I have spoken with the chair of planning and zoning. The expiration on the moratorium is September 24th. They voted for 1 year, but I do believe they could vote to address it earlier if they wanted to.
But by not
the reason, just let me finish, that the reason that I brought it forward to begin with, if you recall, I went to the planning and zoning,
Right.
expecting them to motion and second, which they did, based on the Board of Selectmen's vote,
Right.
and that's the question.
So I think that was the reason why we decided to go with the ordinance, so we didn't have to put the town at risk of them approving.
Exactly right.
Right. And
because the ordinance, they can't override the ordinance.
Right. It would also seem to me that even if they are going to consider it, we should be advancing in parallel, because September 24th is the end of the moratorium, and we can't rely on P&Z having, even if they give...
Meeting the deadline.
Yeah. Yeah.
I personally would have hoped, I'll speak for myself, that when the Board of Selectmen voted to establish a policy as requested by, whether the policy was to approve or not approve, but they did feel that the Board of Selectmen is responsible for the setting of policy in the town of Ridgefield, and that the issue of cannabis sales is a policy for the town that should be determined first by the Board of Selectmen. We voted to set a policy.
Yeah.
We went over to planning and zoning. I attended a meeting. I explained it to them. The vote last night was the table. So we'll actually do 2 public hearings, July 13th, it would be. I put the 17th.
And August 17th.
August 17th with a town meeting on September 7th. Perfect. So I'll have a motion to entertain that the Board of Selectmen set 2 dates for a public hearing of July 13th and August 17th with a town meeting on September 7th for the purpose of passing, or for the purpose of enacting a cannabis ordinance in the town of Ridgefield, prohibiting.
I'll make the motion. Yes, David.
And I'll second.
So we have a motion made and seconded, Bob and Barbara. Any further debate? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0.
Rob Hendrick joins the discussion, arriving a little later.
Just out of curiosity, what happens if the moratorium lapses? Right, so, again, probably you'll take care of that, it's probably not an issue, but if it did in fact lapse, so what's the worst case scenario, what could happen?
I think there's probably two ways to answer that. So
First of all, from the state perspective, the state has to license these businesses. And so the state may or may not license a business within Ridgefield. We can't control the state licensing process. But in terms of Ridgefield regulations, actually, it was Mr. Carr, I have to give him credit, that spotted a very small subset of our medical marijuana regulation actually does prohibit.
You're right.
And even, we didn't discuss this, by the way, when we did our moratorium.
Because I didn't see it.
There is language, very, a bit buried, but it's in the medical marijuana section that prohibits the, I believe the words are the growth and distribution, I believe are the words.
Or dispensing.
Or dispensing, thank you. Growth and dispensing of marijuana. These are the words.
I think it's recreational. I think
Yeah.
it says recreational.
It just says marijuana, I believe, in Ridgefield. Now, I've talked to Mr. Beecher. This is one of the three things that we asked Tom Beecher in the few weeks when we sort of needed to pull back and just understand what things are. So I talked to Mr. Beecher about, well, how does that regulation either help or hinder? How does it interpret it under the new regulations? Because our regulation was written a long time ago. It wasn't actually that long ago, but it was just long enough ago that it's not written with the current statute in mind.
Right.
So the answer from Mr. Beecher was that it would be good for us to rewrite. Basically, that regulation, it's interesting, but it's probably causing more question marks than answers for us going forward. If you voted for your policy, and to Mr. Connolly's point, if you had your policy in place and we let the moratorium expire, then as a community, we're collectively in an ambiguous legal spot. Because you do have this policy, but we don't have an ordinance, we don't have a regulation. Right. And the statute says that you need either an ordinance or regulation.
Mr. Marconi?
Yes.
The exact language, this is in 7.13B2. Dispensing and growing of recreational marijuana is also prohibited within the town of Ridgefield and shall not be permitted unless expressly authorized in these regulations.
Right. Okay. And it's the dispensing, growing marijuana, it's those three words that...
Well, recreational also, recreational marijuana.
Yeah. But it's not...
And that will survive after the moratorium. The question is, would it prevent it if somebody brought in an application for a micro cultivator or something?
Right.
Could they do that?
And the advice of counsel is that we would likely face a legal challenge.
So the Board of Selectmen conducted their 4th and 5th public hearings, followed by a town meeting on September the 7th. Before the commission finalized its referral list on this application on July 26, Alice Dew had sent referral letters to the police chief and health department director. As of August 12th, only 2 of these referral letters have been filed with the land use office to the Board of Selectmen and to the ECDC. One is expected to also go to the Board of Finance. The only 2 responses received are unanimously in support of the amended regulation. Police Chief Jeff Kreitz cryptically responded, "Definitely the correct move." Ridgefield Health Director Ed Briggs supports banning marijuana stores in town because marijuana use increases mental health issues such as depression and psychosis and memory loss in young adults. Colorado has experienced an increase in crime, traffic accidents, emergency room visits, and hospitalizations. Mr. Briggs is particularly concerned with edibles containing THC that cause enhanced effects and can easily get in the hands of children. He urges the commission to do its job and not to allow these stores in Ridgefield. On August the 8th, Rob Hendrick sent referral letters regarding this application to the ECDC and Board of Selectmen. That is 62 days after the commission received this application and just 8 days before opening the public hearing, and 15 weeks after receiving this letter from the Board of Selectmen. Clearly, the Board of Selectmen stated plainly the town policy prohibits all cannabis businesses. The only thing that changed is that the reaction to the commission's non-action, the town proceeded through a parallel process to transform that policy into a town meeting approved ordinance. And the ECDC called a special meeting on the morning of August 16th, and Ms. Norwood reported that the commission voted unanimously to oppose this application, which came as quite a surprise. At the ECDC meeting on September 12th, Ms. Norwood had to acknowledge that the meeting was not properly noticed and illegal and all business conducted null and void, including the letter she read to this commission.
First thing I want to do is approval of the August 2022 minutes. Our meeting of August 16 was deemed an illegal meeting because we didn't give adequate notice, so we're not going to review those minutes.
The ECDC seems to forget that it is a commission appointed by the Board of Selectmen. Once the Selectmen set a town policy, continuing to oppose it publicly is an act of insubordination. Later in this meeting, they vote unanimously once again in support of the letter of opposition, now in defiance of a duly approved town ordinance for which they must be held accountable. So now, from the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of August the 16th. Fast forward to September 7th and the town meeting to consider and vote on the ordinance. 188 fellow Ridgefielders, many of you included, came out to make the fateful decision. Okay, there were no pitchforks or torches, but there was plenty of energy and passion in the room. Here's a condensation of that 90-minute meeting for anyone who may have missed it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? We're going to go ahead and call to order the town meeting for this evening. The purpose of the town meeting, we have 4 items on our agenda this evening. What we're going to do is move the question about cannabis to be question number 1 at the town meeting.
So everybody now has one of these. You are going to write on the back.
Still
yes,
people outside.
We are going to take care of those people. If they haven't gotten one of these yet, they will have to now wait online. But those people who have it can go now. What you are going to do is write yes or no on the back of this. Only yes or no, not yay or nay. Yes or no, and you are going to put it. You are going to put it in this box.
Now we can borrow one from Tim.
Mr. Marconi and I are going to go. Okay, do that now. Do that now. Yes or no. Put it in the box and leave if you'd like to. Is there any further business to come before the meeting? No, hold on.
Yeah. Yes.
Hold on.
The tally.
Hold on. We have the tally from the cannabis ordinance. There 188 people voted. 144 voted for the ordinance. 43 voted against the ordinance. There was 1 blank ballot. The motion passes. The ordinance is confirmed. Is there any other business to come before the meeting? There being none, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
The result was decisive, 76.6 in favor of the ordinance, 22.9% opposed, and 1 blank ballot. Thank you for extending the moratorium in the event of a different outcome from the town meeting by extending it to December 16th. That has provided time to amend the application to reflect the ordinance, which has been shared with the Commission's attorney, with whom the applicant spoke last Wednesday, to make sure that he had this revision and the approved ordinance, and to offer to revise it in just about any way he recommends and that the Commission would accept, to avoid prolonging this process any longer than absolutely necessary. Or the Commission may want to start all over from scratch and make it a DIY project that could take the Commission months to complete. Here are the top 12 reasons to approve this application tonight. A pot shop is demographically and culturally incompatible with Ridgefield and will drive out good business, creating a vacuum that attracts other Skid Row businesses. Today's THC potency is excessive and addictive, producing psychosis and depression. Because of confiscatory taxes, the legal cannabis business is unsustainable, corrupting the legal cannabis space and fueling the illicit market. resulting in unrestrained sales of pot to kids. The social and economic costs dwarf the tax revenues that go mostly to the state, while the costs stay with the community. This application merely updates an existing Ridgefield zoning regulation that banned both medical and recreational marijuana in 2015. The reasons given by the Commission in 2015 are just as valid in 2022 as they were then. The Board of Selectmen were surprised when the Commission failed to take your cue from the town policy and promulgated an ordinance, which was overwhelmingly approved by the town meeting. And the number one reason to approve this regulation is to fulfill your oath of office and to embrace the will of the people as pledged by Mr. Hendrick to the Board of Selectmen.
So to answer your question, Sean, we think it's appropriate to either extend the moratorium and or pass a regulation. Everything's clear. One way or another.
Okay.
And Planning and Zoning Commission has every intention of doing that. And we're happy to take on the issue, but we don't think it's appropriate to take on the issue and kind of get the public all drummed up at the same time that you're trying to do an ordinance.
Over the decades, the Planning and Zoning Commission has burnished its reputation with responsive, well-crafted, and fairly enforced zoning regulations. This is no time to leave a now outdated regulation on the books or to unnecessarily squander months of the Commission's precious time reinventing the wheel. This application helps you update that regulation to comply with state statute, the town's policy, and now its town meeting approved the ordinance. Thank you for watching.